This is the second year I've been to this meeting, and I come to you as an expert on prevention and treatment. And once again, I feel tremendously humbled by the things that you're doing. And then, Barbara said, you got to get the slides. We want the slides early on and so on. But during yesterday afternoon's discussion of racism and the other sessions that we had about it, I went, I'm going back to my room and really completely redo it. And Victoria was kind enough to allow me to replace the slides, because I realized what I wanted to do was present you with some things about mindfulness interventions and the value of those mindfulness interventions for the people you work with and for yourselves. But I just felt like, given the discussion we had about racism, I really needed to focus it more on racism itself. So that's what I'm going to do, and you might have noticed that I'm a white man. And I have to say I'm nervous, and you'll understand why. But first, let me tell you about, last year I talked about prevention and treatment, and now I've written a book, and this is a brief description of the book, and hopefully it will play. There we go. My name's Tony Biglan. I've been a scientist at Oregon Research Institute for 35 years. Thanks to advances in behavioral science, we have figured out how to prevent most of the critical problems facing us. I began my study of psychology in the 1960s. I was inspired by people like Bobby Kennedy, who challenged young people to make a difference.
I come to you today to say that we can build a newer and better nation. I say we can do so, that we must do so, and that we will do so.
In the 60s, we had optimism, attitude, and motivation. What was missing was science. But over the past 50 years, we've learned how to ensure that just about every child thrives. First, children need safe and caring environments. We need to keep anger, criticism, and threat to a minimum. The second thing that makes us thrive is positive reinforcement. I'm not talking about M&Ms or money. I'm talking about attention, listening, smiling, touching, hugging, approval, and warmth. All vital ingredients to keep people persevering, innovating, caring for others, learning new things. We thrive on reinforcement. Science shows that even problems that seem intractable can have simple solutions. Consider John Snow. In 1854 in London, England, he proved that cholera was due to contaminated water. When he got the town to remove the Broad Street pump handle, the cholera epidemic ended. A deadly disease that had killed thousands of people over hundreds of years was stopped by a simple solution. So what is our pump handle? Is there a simple solution that could prevent the psychological and behavioral problems that have plagued us for centuries? The answer is nurturance. The school and family programs we've developed over the past 40 years nurture young people's development while preventing the most common and costly psychological and behavioral problems. But research also shows that our families and schools will never become as nurturing as they could be unless we evolve our capitalist system so that it serves the well-being of everyone. We have more people living in poverty than any other developed country and historic levels of economic inequality. These conditions strain families, increase conflict, and directly contribute to poor health and even suicide. Now we're beginning to see a growing number of people who understand that we must have an economic system that works for everyone. We have the knowledge we need to build the better world that Robert Kennedy challenged us to create. I'm really an optimist. I think that we have the science to ensure that virtually every young person arrives at adulthood with the skills, interests, health habits, and values they need to live a productive life in caring relationships with other people. So a friend of mine who's one of the leaders of the mindfulness movement in psychology likes to say that it's better to miss lunch than to be lunch. And his point is that evolution has evolved organisms such that the first priority is to be safe. So the bunny's out in the field and is eating the veggies and just going like this, and is just going like this and never looks up. What happens? That's an ex-bunny, right? The bunnies that survived are the ones that learned to look like this, right? Human beings and all other primate organisms make avoiding danger their first priority. And that's why threat and all the physiological processes that have been described to you yesterday and today all involve the evolved systems for making sure that you're safe. So Robert Sapolsky's written a wonderful book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and it's a compendium of all of the ways in which humans are affected by stress. This is the HPA axis. If a stressor, let's say a lion, appears, the zebra has a cascade of hormones that result in cortisol, which increases heart rate, increases blood pressure, and enables the zebra to run like hell, right? And if the zebra is fortunate enough to have an older, slower zebra nearby, zebra gets into the woods, lion's gone, it's over. The hormones get reabsorbed, the heart rate goes down, the blood pressure goes down. So why do you suppose that humans can get ulcers from stress and all kinds of other problems from stress, and zebras don't?
Because we can't run from our problems all the time.
Exactly. Would you raise your hand if you've ever found yourself lying in bed, stressing about someone who wasn't lying next to you? Right? Humans can be in the presence of stress just thanks to our minds, which is why the mindfulness movement has been proven so valuable. You know, we've been talking about well-being, and so I live in Oregon where it rains a lot, and we have sun things, you know, in the roof. When occasionally the sun shines, there's a little square of light, right? And I have a cat who you will find when the sun comes through, and this is my picture of what every organism needs. I'm well-fed, I'm safe, I'm warm, you know. This is well-being. It's not just humans, right? So there's the movement to promote psychological flexibility, and I was going to do my breakout session on how that could be useful to you across any of the issues that you might have, but I want to focus it on racism because it seemed to me that one of the things that Barbara asked us to do was get specific about things we could do about racism. And so let me take you through, just give you a little summary here. Problems that become smaller when we cultivate what's called psychological flexibility. Psychological flexibility is the ability to pursue your values even in the context in which your mind is telling you that you really can't do that. And one of the approaches that we've, and so this is a list of some of the things that have been shown. There are now about 130 randomized trials of interventions that increase psychological flexibility and have effects on all of these things, and also these things, prejudice, stigma, stress, and PTSD. And I submit that the value of this, it needs to be explored for the possibility that we can improve the willingness of people to even talk about race. And so here I am, nervously presenting this. So how about racism? Well, the traditional moves are that you shouldn't think prejudiced thoughts, right? And we should control those negative thoughts and feelings. The problem is that it really doesn't work. Efforts to control unwanted thoughts and feelings actually magnify them. I'll give you an example. Try this. I'd like you to not think about chocolate cake. Okay? And just to be clear what I want you to do, I don't want you to think about chocolate cake, okay? I submit, and I've done this for thousands of people, right? You're not going to do it. And the reason is that you're trying to follow the rule, don't think about chocolate cake. Chocolate cake is inside the rule. When you follow a rule, don't think prejudiced thoughts. You're actually going to think more, and I can show you the studies that show that. So here are some new moves. It's the mind versus behaviors. We need to learn to notice our mind and what our mind gives us, and to treat it as something that is not something we have to slavishly follow. We can have these thoughts, and we can choose to pursue our values even when our mind tells us we can't. A guy named Kevin Polk has developed this approach that involves the matrix, where he first gets you to notice that
the five senses. We have five senses that we experience things in the world, touch and sound and so on. But then there's the mental experiences. And he asks you to learn to distinguish between, oh, that's something my mind is telling me versus this is something that's actually happening. And the mindfulness movement is designed to help people to get better at being in the present moment and noticing what's going on and then moving toward things that they value over to the right rather than moving away from things. So let me walk through this as it relates to me and racism. So this is my matrix. And if you come to this workshop session, I'm going to ask you to fill this out. So the first thing is the bottom right quadrant. What do I want to move toward? What in my mind is important? What do I value? And what do I want to make more of in my life? So my value is relevant to racism. I think it's that every person feels safe and cared for and is nurtured. Every person. And I think that's fundamental to our succeeding in getting people to be able to talk about race and to be able to do it in a way that works for everyone. Okay, so what kinds of thoughts come up for me that move me away from pursuing this value? Well, I'm thinking about psychological flexibility. That could help, I think. But maybe people will think I'm just telling them to stifle their concerns about racism. So I hesitate to say anything, and I have the thought, I better not say anything. I don't want to get into this. And by the way, I'd like to thank Tennessee. Is your Tennessee over here? Right? Right. Because we had a discussion at that table, and you made me feel comfortable enough that that was an important thing in getting me to do this at all. So with those kinds of thoughts, what kind of behaviors move me away? Well, behaviors like keeping quiet. And that made me think about a black man I saw at a food court in Boston on Saturday. And as I've gotten into this, and I've got to the point where I'm sort of sensitive to noticing how people feel, and I want everyone, even people who don't like me, to feel okay, to be nurtured, right? So I'm walking through this food court, and this guy looked not happy, and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I didn't make any facial expression, and I just walked on. And as I walked away, I thought, damn, if anything, he thought I didn't like him, or he certainly didn't feel nurtured by me, and I was tempted to go back and say, you know, I walked by and I didn't smile, and I thought maybe that wasn't good, and I should have smiled. And I didn't do it, and I regret not doing it. But it's just a little example of the kind of thing that you can do and that could make a difference. And so behaviors that move me away. And then there are behaviors that I think could make a difference at the molecular level, at the micro-interactional level. Smile at people who are different. My wife works in an area where there are a lot of street kids and so on. And she said one day she's walking down the street and she smiled at this guy and he said, "Thank you for smiling at me." Those moment-to-moment little interactions make a difference in our lives. And they make us more likely to be quiet and turn away, or more likely to be open. But we're all in our minds, right? I mean, how many people have had a thought since they came into this room, right? We're all in our minds, and our minds are getting us to be cautious. Not, threat. Maybe that guy would be angry at me at that food court, and maybe it wouldn't turn out well, so you don't do it, right? And so this is an approach to getting clear about our values and noticing our mind and the behaviors that our mind makes us engage in that we don't have to, that you can learn to have those thoughts and feelings and not act on them, and in fact begin to take the steps that you can take. So that's what I have in mind. So if you join me in exploring how psychological flexibility might contribute to reducing racism, it's not like I'm the expert and I'm telling you, but maybe if we get out our matrices and you work through that, I'd like to explore whether that could be useful. So that's about it.